Rome did not conquer the ancient world on bravery alone. It conquered it by turning war into a financial system. We like to picture Roman legions as symbols of discipline and courage, iron wool wrapped in steel armor. But every shield, every sword, every mile marched depended on something far less romantic: money, vast amounts of it. Armies had to be fed daily. Weapons had to be forged and replaced. Roads had to be built and maintained. Horses needed grain. Siege engines consumed timber, labor, and time. Empire was expensive, relentlessly so, which raises a question most people never ask. How did Rome afford centuries of non-stop warfare, and what happens when a system built on expansion can no longer expand? Because once you look closely, Rome's wars were never just military campaigns. They were financial operations. And once that machinery started turning, stopping it became impossible. In the early days of the Roman Republic, warfare looked very different. The army was made up of citizens who owned land. If you were a farmer, you could be called to fight. Soldiers equipped themselves and expected to return home when the campaign ended. War was seasonal, local, and limited. That model collapsed as Rome grew. Campaigns stretched farther from Italy and lasted longer. Soldiers could no longer abandon their fields for years at a time without ruin. Rome needed something new: full-time professionals who fought for pay, not duty. This was the turning point. The state began issuing regular wages to soldiers, at first modest, then increasingly necessary to secure loyalty. And soon Rome discovered something transformative: conquest itself could fund the army. Every new province meant taxes, every victory meant slaves, every captured territory brought land, metals, and tribute. Expansion became profitable. War paid for more war. But profit comes with expectation. Rome didn't rely solely on taxes. During prolonged conflicts, especially the Punic Wars against Carthage, the Republic borrowed heavily from wealthy citizens. The equites, Rome's financial elite, lent enormous sums to the state. These were not sacrifices, they were deals. In exchange for funding wars, lenders received interest, exclusive contracts, and control over tax collection in conquered provinces. They gained monopolies, political influence, and access to new markets. Violence became an investment vehicle. War was no longer just policy, it was business. As this system matured, Rome itself changed. Generals became political power brokers because they controlled loot. Senators backed wars they personally profited from. Private contractors, the publicani, handled logistics, taxes, and supplies, extracting fortunes along the way. It was an ancient version of a military-industrial economy, one wrapped in marble and tradition. But the bills never stopped coming. Soldiers had to be paid, creditors demanded returns, administrators required funding. And when expansion slowed or rebellions drained resources, the state reached for the only tool it had left: the currency. Beginning under Emperor Nero, the silver denarius was quietly altered. A little less silver here, a little more base metal there. Changes were subtle at first. Most people didn't notice. Over time, emperors repeated the process again and again and again. Within 2 centuries, a coin that once held real silver had become a shell. Inflation spread, prices rose, trust evaporated. By the 3rd century, Rome's monetary system was unraveling. Those at the top adapted easily. Senators and financiers stored wealth in land, estates, slaves, and overseas holdings. They negotiated exemptions and leveraged connections. The burden fell elsewhere. Ordinary Romans paid taxes in debased money. They were conscripted. They faced rising prices and shrinking wages. Public services decayed. Corruption flourished. This wasn't simply military decline, it was financial collapse. Now step back and look at the present. Governments run chronic deficits. Wars are funded through borrowing. Central banks expand money supplies to cover gaps. Defense contractors profit. Financial institutions earn interest. Asset holders grow wealthier while wages lag behind prices. The details are different, the logic is not. Rome shows us what happens when an economy depends on constant expansion, especially violent expansion. Eventually, there are no new lands to seize, no new populations to tax, no new resources to extract. When growth stops, the system turns inward. Rome raised taxes, debased currency faster, tightened control. Distracted the public with spectacle while the elite fortified themselves behind wealth and privilege. Today, we use different language. We call it stimulus, monetary policy, quantitative easing, but the mechanics feel eerily familiar. Money is created, spending exceeds income. Those closest to the system buy assets. Everyone else watches purchasing power fade. Wars are still financed with debt. The United States spent trillions in Afghanistan, largely borrowed. The interest flows somewhere. The contracts go somewhere, and the cost eventually appears in inflation, reduced services, and instability. Just like Rome, once debt becomes the default, emergencies are no longer required to justify it. Printing becomes routine, borrowing becomes normal, the extraordinary becomes permanent. That's the danger. Economic history isn't a collection of dead facts. It's a record of systems that believed they could go on forever until the math failed. Rome outsourced power to finance, hollowed out its currency, bound itself to endless obligation, not because it was uniquely corrupt, but because it built a machine without an off switch. We live in a different kind of empire now, global, digital, driven by capital instead of legions, but the incentives are strikingly similar. Money follows power, war remains profitable, inflation still punishes those least able to escape it, and stability lasts only as long as belief holds. So what can you do? You can't escape the system entirely, but you can see it clearly. That means studying history, not just markets, watching incentives, not headlines, asking who benefits when complexity keeps you confused, because you were never meant to examine how empires pay for war. You were meant to watch the spectacle, not the ledger. But once you understand the mechanism, you can't unsee it. Financial literacy isn't just about saving or investing, it's about understanding power, systems, and the fragility behind things that appear permanent. So the next time a new conflict erupts, or a new spending bill passes, or a new crisis demands sacrifice, don't just listen to the story. Follow the money, because empires don't fall when enemies breach the walls. They fall when the numbers stop adding up and no one is willing to admit it.